Imagine a ghost on the wind, a whisper in the stone, a civilization so vast it spanned continents, so advanced it mapped the stars with frightening precision, yet it left behind not a single word. Not one. What if the greatest story ever told was never written? In the forgotten corners of our world, buried beneath the dust of millennia, lie the ruins of an empire that should not exist, a civilization that defies every rule in the history books. We have found their cities, impossibly ancient and sprawling. We have stood in awe before their monolithic structures, cut and placed with a technology we are only now beginning to comprehend. We have unearthed their art, symbols and patterns that speak of a profound understanding of geometry, of astronomy, of life itself. But of their language, their laws, their histories, their names, there is only silence, an absolute, unbroken, terrifying silence. This is not the story of a lost civilization whose records we cannot decipher. This is the story of a civilization that had no records at all, a people who built an eternal world in stone but left their thoughts to the wind. Mainstream archaeology has tried to label them, to fit them into a neat, primitive box. They call them a mystery, an anomaly. But what if the truth is far more dangerous? What if their silence wasn't an absence of knowledge, but a deliberate act of concealment? What if they knew something so profound, so powerful, that they refused to write it down, locking it away forever in the very fabric of their silent stones? We are taught that history began with the written word. But tonight, we journey back before the first scribe ever put chisel to tablet, back into the echoes of the void, to uncover the untold story of the silent civilization, and the terrifying possibility that everything we know about our own past is wrong. The story begins, as it so often does, not with a grand discovery but with a quiet anomaly. A single stone out of place. For decades, satellite imagery of a remote, windswept plateau, a place cartographers had long dismissed as uninhabitable, showed something. A shadow where no shadow should be. A faint, almost imperceptible pattern on the earth, like a scar from a wound so ancient the world had forgotten it was ever inflicted. To the naked eye from the ground there was nothing. Just endless rock and resilient scrub, a landscape of raw, brutal nature. But from the heavens, under the right light at the right time of day, the ghost revealed itself. It was a grid, a perfect geometric grid stretching for miles, etched into the very bedrock of the planet. For years, this digital ghost was a curiosity, a footnote in geographical surveys, dismissed as a natural geological formation or a glitch in the satellite data. No one could justify the colossal expense of sending a team to investigate a place that was, for all intents and purposes, the middle of nowhere. It was a world away from the fertile crescents and river valleys where civilization was supposed to have been born. History, we are told, is a story of water and wheat, of cities rising from the mud of bountiful rivers. This place was the antithesis of that narrative. It was dry, it was high, it was empty, it was the void. But the ghost in the machine wouldn't go away. With every new generation of satellite, the image became clearer, the pattern more undeniable. It wasn't a natural formation. The lines were too straight, the angles too precise. It looked designed. An international consortium of independent researchers, funded by patrons who preferred to remain in the shadows, finally decided to force the issue. They assembled a small, rugged team, equipped with ground-penetrating radar and the sort of stubborn curiosity that mainstream academia often frowns upon. Their mission was simple: to walk the grid, to touch the ghost, and to see what, if anything, was there. The first days were fruitless. They walked the invisible lines, their boots crunching on stone that had seen nothing but wind and sun for 10,000 years. Their instruments beeped and whirred, showing nothing but deeper stone beneath their feet. The frustration was palpable. The thin air made every step a labor. The sun was relentless. They were chasing a phantom, an expensive and exhausting fool's errand. They were about to pack it in, to admit defeat and return with a report that would confirm the skepticism of their peers. There was nothing there. And then one of the surveyors, a young geophysicist named Aris, stumbled. He didn't trip over an exposed rock or a root. His foot simply sank. He fell forward, his hand plunging wrist-deep into what he thought was solid ground. It felt like cool, smooth glass. He scrambled back, his heart pounding. The others rushed over. They brushed away the thin layer of sand and dust, and what they found stopped the breath in their lungs. It wasn't rock. It was a surface, perfectly flat, dark as obsidian, and cool to the touch despite the blazing sun. It was impossibly smooth, with a joined line so fine it was almost invisible. They had found the top of something, something buried. They spent the next week digging, not with heavy machinery but with hands and brushes, like surgeons performing a delicate operation. What they slowly, painstakingly, uncovered was not a wall or a floor but the top of a colossal block, a single monolithic stone. As they cleared more of the area, they realized it was one of many. The faint grid lines seen from space were not lines at all, but the tops of these buried megaliths. They had been standing on the roof of a buried city. The ground-penetrating radar, which had previously shown nothing but homogeneous rock, was recalibrated, and the image that slowly rendered on their screens was impossible. Beneath their feet, stretching for as far as their sensors could reach, was a complex, a labyrinth of massive structures, arranged with a precision that would challenge a modern laser-guided construction company. The blocks they had uncovered were not just building materials. They were the buildings themselves, titanic megaliths that dwarfed anything ever found at Stonehenge or Karnak. Some were estimated to weigh thousands of tons, and they were everywhere, a silent, subterranean forest of stone. But the most chilling discovery was yet to come. As the team began to map the complex, as they rappelled into the newly excavated chasms between the great stones, they searched for the one thing every archaeologist expects to find, the one thing that defines a civilization: a record. They searched for inscriptions, for hieroglyphs, for pictograms, for carvings, for any mark that would tell them who built this place. On the walls of the megaliths, in the hidden chambers they discovered deep below the surface, on the few scattered artifacts they found, pottery of an unknown style, tools made of a mineral they couldn't immediately identify, there was nothing. No writing, no symbols that could be construed as a language. The art was purely geometric, intricate patterns of interlocking lines and spirals, but no figures, no people, no animals, no story. It was the ultimate archaeological nightmare. A civilization with the power to move mountains and build on a scale that beggared belief. A society that must have required immense organization, planning, and communication, had vanished without leaving a single clue as to who they were. They were a people without a name, a history without a voice. They were the architects of the void, and their legacy was silence. The implications of this discovery were staggering, and frankly, terrifying to the established historical order. According to everything we know, a society cannot reach this level of complexity without a system of writing. You cannot organize a workforce to quarry, transport, and place a 2,000-ton stone without written plans, without ledgers, without a method of recording numbers and instructions. You cannot build a city that spans miles, aligned perfectly with cardinal directions and celestial events, without a sophisticated understanding of mathematics and astronomy, knowledge that must be recorded and passed down. Yet here it was. The evidence was irrefutable, buried in the earth. A civilization of master engineers, master astronomers, master builders, who were, by our definition, illiterate. The mainstream archaeological community reacted with predictable hostility. The initial reports were dismissed. The data was flawed, they said. The interpretations were fanciful. It was a natural formation, a freak of geology. When photographs and physical samples could no longer be denied, the narrative shifted. This was a minor, isolated culture, they argued. A primitive society that got lucky, perhaps, or spent generations on a single, obsessive project. They were a dead end, a branch of the human tree that led nowhere. They were insignificant because they left no written legacy. Because, in the eyes of history, if you do not write, you do not exist. But the researchers on the ground knew what they were seeing was not primitive. The stonework was the most advanced they had ever encountered. The seams between the multi-ton blocks were so precise that a razor blade could not be slipped between them. The surfaces were polished to a mirror-like finish that had survived millennia of burial. In some places, they found stones cut with complex curved angles that fit together like a three-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. This wasn't the work of brutes with flint tools and endless time. This was the work of masters. This was evidence of a lost technology, a science of stone that we have yet to rediscover. And then they found the star charts. In one of the deepest chambers, a vast, circular room with a ceiling that soared into the darkness, they found the patterns. Not carved, not painted, but embedded into the stone itself. Tiny, crystalline flecks that glittered in the beams of their lights. At first, they seemed random. But when Aris, the geophysicist, ran a computer analysis, his blood ran cold. The patterns on the ceiling were a perfect, distortion-free map of the night sky. Not the sky as it appears today, but the sky as it would have appeared over that plateau 150,000 years ago. This was the moment the mystery deepened into a conspiracy. 150,000 years ago, modern humans, Homo sapiens, were thought to be just beginning their long journey out of Africa. The official timeline of human civilization starts well over 100,000 years later. It was impossible. It was heresy. And yet the data was the data. The star map was there. The stones were there. The silence was there. What kind of people could have built this? What kind of society leaves behind a legacy of celestial mechanics and cyclopean architecture, but not a single poem, not a single king's list, not a single shopping receipt? The team on the plateau began to entertain a radical, unsettling idea. What if we were looking at it all wrong? What if we were judging an alien mind by our own limited standards? We are a species obsessed with the written word, with the linear progression of thought, with the recording of every detail. We are defined by our texts, our libraries, our digital archives. We have outsourced our memory to the page and the screen. What if this civilization had never taken that step? What if they didn't need to? The human mind has a capacity for memory that we have almost completely forgotten. In ancient, pre-literate societies, memory was not just a faculty, it was a technology. Oral traditions were the bedrock of culture, preserving vast epics, complex genealogies, and detailed legal codes with perfect fidelity for generations. Storytellers were not mere entertainers. They were walking libraries. Their minds trained from birth to be infallible repositories of knowledge. 1. They used mnemonic techniques, rhyme, rhythm, and elaborate mental constructs known as memory palaces, to store and retrieve information with a precision that seems superhuman to us today. Could the silent civilization have perfected this mental technology? Could they have built a society where knowledge was not stored on a tablet, but in a mind? Imagine a council of elders, their minds holding the entire history of their people, every law, every scientific principle, every star chart. Imagine apprentices spending their lives not learning to read, but learning to remember. In such a society, knowledge would be alive, fluid, and sacred. It wouldn't be a commodity to be written down and mass-produced. It would be a living thing, passed from a teacher's breath to a student's mind in a sacred, unbroken chain. In such a world, Writing might be seen not as an invention, but as a degradation, a crutch for a weak mind, a way of making the sacred profane by trapping it in dead symbols. This idea began to explain some of the anomalies of the site. The intricate, repeating geometric patterns found everywhere were not just decoration. They were perhaps mnemonic keys, complex visual triggers designed to unlock vast stores of memorized information. By tracing a pattern with a finger, by meditating on its form, one could perhaps access a specific piece of knowledge, a law, a myth, a mathematical formula. The entire city, in this sense, would become a giant, interactive library. The architecture itself was the information storage system. And what about the lack of depictions of people or animals? Was this a religious taboo, or was it something more? To draw a thing is to create a symbol for it, to separate the image from the reality. Perhaps for this civilization, the separation of symbol and reality was a dangerous step. Perhaps their way of thinking was more holistic, more integrated with the world around them. They didn't need to draw a picture of the sky on the ceiling of a cave. They built a perfect replica of the cosmos, not as a symbol, but as a functional model, a tool for understanding. This leads to an even more profound and unsettling question. If they didn't write, how did they communicate complex engineering plans over vast distances? How did they achieve the uniformity of design and construction that was evident across the entire plateau? The answer might lie in the very stones they used. The team's geologist had been puzzled by the composition of the megaliths. They were a form of granite, but laced with an unusually high concentration of quartz crystal. Quartz, as modern science knows, has piezoelectric properties. It can generate an electric charge when put under pressure, and it can vibrate at a precise frequency. It can be used to transmit and receive information. Was it possible? Could they have used the stones themselves as a communication network? Could they have encoded information not in symbols, but in frequencies, in vibrations, in resonant harmonics? The idea was straight out of science fiction, but the physical evidence was there. The entire city could have been a colossal, solid-state computer, a network of crystalline stone humming with a silent language of vibration that we have no way of detecting. The builders would not have needed blueprints. They would have felt the design, sung the instructions into the rock, shaping it with a technology of sound and frequency that could literally move mountains. This theory, as wild as it sounded, was the only one that seemed to fit all the facts. It explained the precision, the scale, the lack of tools or writing, and the strange, resonant quality the team felt whenever they were deep inside the complex. It felt alive, as if the stones were listening, waiting. It explained the silence not as an absence but as a different kind of presence, a language too profound for the human ear to hear. As the exploration of the plateau continued, a new pattern began to emerge, one that would shatter the idea of this being an isolated culture. The unique geometric art, the specific way the stones were cut and joined, the astronomical alignments, echoes of these began to be found in other places around the world. On remote islands in the Pacific, high in the Andes Mountains, submerged off the coast of Japan, and even in the deserts of Egypt, archaeologists had found ruins that shared the same distinct architectural signature. These sites had always been treated as separate mysteries, the work of unconnected local cultures. But now, seen through the lens of the silent civilization, they looked like something else entirely. Outposts. Fragments of a single, global, prehistoric empire. How could this be possible? The timeline was all wrong. These sites were separated by thousands of miles of ocean, and according to the history books, by thousands of years in time. But what if the history books were wrong? What if the carbon dating was the anomaly? Carbon dating is a reliable tool, but it dates organic material found at a site, not the stones themselves. A campfire left by a wandering hunter 1,000 years after a temple was built can be mistakenly used to date the temple itself. What if these structures were all far, far older than mainstream archaeology believed? What if they were all contemporary, relics of a single age of wonders? The idea of a prehistoric global maritime civilization has long been a fringe theory, the stuff of speculative fiction, too, but the evidence was mounting. The similarities in the megalithic construction were too striking to be a coincidence. 3 across the globe, we find ancient legends of a golden age, a time when gods walked the earth and gave humanity the gifts of civilization. These gods were almost always associated with the sea. They arrived in great ships, taught the arts of building and astronomy, and then vanished, promising to return. The myths of Ons in Mesopotamia, Viracocha in South America, Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica, they all tell the same story. Were these gods the survivors of the silent civilization, spreading their knowledge across the world? And what of the shared myths? How is it that cultures on opposite sides of the planet with no known contact all share nearly identical stories of a great flood that wiped out a former world? Why do they all speak of serpents and sky gods, and why do they all build pyramids and stone circles aligned to the stars? Mainstream historians call it coincidence, the result of a universal human psyche. But that is an explanation that explains nothing. It's a dismissal, a way of avoiding a truth that is too uncomfortable to consider. That our ancient past is not a story of isolated cultures stumbling independently toward civilization, but a story of a shared inheritance, a legacy from a single, forgotten mother culture. A culture that was so advanced, it didn't need to write its story down, because it had written it into the very geography of the planet. This global network, this silent empire of the sea, must have had a capital, a heartland. The team on the high plateau began to suspect they had found it. This was not just another outpost. It was the center of the web. And it was here that the deepest, most forbidden secrets were kept. The secret of their technology, their origins, and most importantly, the reason for their silence. Why would a civilization capable of such incredible feats choose to remain anonymous? Why build a world and then erase your own name from it? The answer may lie in the very nature of the knowledge they possessed. We live in an age where information is power, but it is also a weapon. Our written records, our histories, are filled with propaganda, with the lies of the victors, with doctrines designed to control and manipulate. The written word can be a tool of liberation, but it can also be a cage for the mind. Perhaps the silent civilization understood this danger. Perhaps their science was not just a science of the physical world, but a science of consciousness itself. The specific frequencies and geometries they used in their architecture might not have been just for building or communication, but for altering human perception, for enhancing mental abilities, for opening doorways in the mind. This kind of knowledge is a fire that can warm but also burn. In the wrong hands, it could be the ultimate tool of enslavement. Imagine a technology that could directly influence thought, that could create harmony or discord, that could heal or destroy, simply through the manipulation of sound and vibration. To write down the blueprints for such a technology would be to arm every future generation with the means of its own destruction. The only way to safeguard it would be to never write it down, to pass it on only through a rigorous, disciplined oral tradition, from master to initiate, ensuring that only those with the wisdom to handle it would ever possess it. The silence, then, was not a sign of primitivism. It was the ultimate act of wisdom and responsibility. But this raises an even darker possibility. If their knowledge was so powerful, what happened to them? A civilization this advanced does not simply fade away. They were not conquered by barbarians, No primitive tribe could stand against a people who could manipulate the very frequencies of matter. So where did they go? Deep within the subterranean city, in the chamber with the star-chart ceiling, the team found something else. In the center of the room was a raised dais, and on it, a series of concentric rings carved into the stone. The patterns were familiar. They mirrored the geometric art found throughout the complex. But these were different. They seemed to form a kind of circuit, and at the exact center there was a depression, a void where something was meant to be placed. As the team ran their sensor scans over the dais, the readings went off the charts. The area was humming with a residual energy, a faint echo of an immense power that had been unleashed there long ago. And all around the dais, on the floor, the walls, and even the ceiling, there was a thin, vitrified layer, as if the stone had been flash-melted by an intense burst of heat and energy. There were no bodies, no bones, no artifacts, just the melted stone and a lingering sense of departure. It was a machine, a device, and it was aligned with the star map on the ceiling. Not the sky of 150,000 years ago, but another, far more recent alignment. An alignment that had occurred roughly 12,000 years ago. This was a date that resonated with 1,000 ancient myths. It was the date Plato gave for the destruction of Atlantis. It was the date that geological records show the end of the last ice age, a time of catastrophic global flooding and climate change, a period known as the Younger Dryas, a time when the world was torn apart. What if the silent civilization foresaw this cataclysm? What if their astronomical knowledge allowed them to predict the cosmic event that would trigger it? A comet impact, a solar flare, a shift in the Earth's axis. What if they knew they could not survive it, that their global empire would be washed away by the rising waters and shattered by the shuddering of the planet? And what if this machine was their answer? Not a weapon, not a generator, but a gateway, a way to escape. The star map wasn't just a map, it was a destination. The intricate patterns and resonant frequencies were not just a language, they were the key, the cosmic address. They did not vanish. They left. They used their ultimate technology, the culmination of their silent science, to transcend the physical world, to step through a door to the stars, leaving their empty stone cities behind as a silent, eternal testament. This is, of course, a speculation, a leap into the void. It is a story that no mainstream archaeologist would ever dare to tell, but it is a story that fits the evidence in a way that primitive builders never will. It explains the impossible engineering, the global connections, the advanced astronomy, and above all, the silence. The silence was the key, the discipline that allowed them to develop a science of consciousness so advanced it could literally take them to the stars. They left their world behind, but they also left a warning that some knowledge is too dangerous to be written, a warning that the universe is far stranger and more mysterious than we can imagine. And they left perhaps an invitation. The machine in the star chamber is quiet now. The energy is a mere echo, but the patterns remain. The frequencies are still locked in the crystalline stone. What if the city is not dead, but merely sleeping? What if it is waiting for someone to learn its silent language? To understand that history is not just what is written in books, but what is sung by the stars and remembered by the stones. The discovery on the high plateau has not been released to the public. The consortium of researchers who funded the expedition has classified the findings, locking them away from a world they feel is not ready to hear them. They know that to reveal the existence of a civilization 150,000 years old, a civilization that possessed a technology that rivals our own, would be to shatter the very foundations of modern society. It would rewrite every history book, every religious text, every scientific paradigm. It would force us to confront the fact that we are not the pinnacle of creation, but merely the latest in a long line of forgotten worlds. We are a species with amnesia, stumbling around the ruins of a past so glorious we cannot even conceive of it. But secrets this big cannot be kept forever. The echoes from the void are growing louder. More and more anomalous sites are being discovered, thanks to new satellite technology and deep-sea drones. The pattern is becoming undeniable. A hidden chapter of human history is forcing its way into the light. The story of the silent civilization is the story of our own hidden origins. It is a story that tells us that the past is not dead, that it holds the key not just to where we came from, but to where we are going. What other secrets lie buried beneath the sands and the seas? What other silent cities are waiting to be woken from their slumber? The journey into the void has only just begun. The silence is breaking, and we must be ready to listen. Do you believe that ancient civilizations possessed a knowledge that we have lost? Do you think it's possible that our history is far older and more mysterious than we are taught in schools? The stones are there. The alignments are there. The myths are there. The only thing missing is a voice. But if you listen closely, in the hum of the earth, in the whisper of the wind over the ancient megaliths, you can almost hear it. A language not of words, but of worlds. A silent song that echoes across the ages, waiting for us to remember the tune. What hidden site, what forgotten ruin should we explore next on our journey to uncover the lost truths of our ancestors? The answers are out there, not in the ink of fragile pages, but in the eternal, silent stone. Subscribe to our channel, and together, we will continue to listen to the echoes of the void.